Welcome everyone to the We Are In It Together podcast. I'm Jamie Lynn Tatera and I'm here today with Gwen Tatera. And you might notice the similarities in the last name there. Gwen Tatera is my mother, but more than just being my mother and an amazing woman. She is the author of The OCD Beaver, and she is here with us today to talk about obsessive compulsive disorder, the people maybe that are even on the obsessive compulsive spectrum, and how we can identify these things in our youth and what we can do to help kids when they're having a sticky brain, whether they're actually on the obsessive compulsive spectrum or they're just having a brain that's repetitive. What kind of resources we can bring to kids so that they can thrive and with whatever their wiring is. So welcome, Gwen. I'm so glad to have you here with us today.
Oh, thank you, Jamie Lynn. Yes, I'm her mama, and I'm also a retired elementary teacher, and I've written some books along with my husband, Dr. Charles Thomas. And okay, that's in my introduction.
Great, so glad you're here with us. So it's funny that I'm going to be calling you Gwen during
yes,
our
that's very
but I'll
funny.
do that because you're not everybody's mother. Okay, so I would love it if you would begin by sharing a little bit about what inspired you to write the book OCD Beaver. And maybe this includes a little bit of your own life experiences with obsessive compulsive disorder. So
okay, I've had obsessive compulsive disorder since I was 8 years old, and it was the year following rheumatic fever. I had missed a year of school, and it was a very traumatic year. And during after it was over with, I made my first confession, and I first realized that I was doing things that were peculiar because I had a compulsion to say I did things I didn't do. This little 8-year-old, this innocent little girl, was telling the priest how she killed somebody and all this stuff. It never happened. And I don't know why I did it. I don't know. I just was compelled. I just felt like I had to do this. Priest informed me very quickly that I had not done those things. Thank God. And I did have a conversation with another priest that, helped me kind of get that there was something going on and there was a name for it, but that's all I knew. On the whole, I tried to hide it constantly. And what compelled me to write?
Is it okay if I interrupt for just a moment to clarify?
Yeah.
So for you first became aware that something was going on with your mind when you had, was it like obsessions that you had done something wrong and you had to confess these things, but there are things that you had never done? Was that your first symptom?
Well, I just wanted to say things that weren't true, that would torture myself. I was torturing myself somewhat as a child. I'd had a rough time, and I just did it. I can't really tell you why. I just felt compelled. I had to do it. It was a compulsion, absolutely. And anyway, after I did that, I started realizing that some other things I wanted to do repetitively. And so I decided when I grew up, I decided I wanted to try to help other people because I did receive help myself. And I thought I could write a book, which I did, and talk about a beaver who was having the symptoms like I had, only I didn't gnaw on bats like the beaver does. But the beaver feels very bad about that. He can't stop chewing on things. He was gnawing and he was getting out of control. And I thought by doing this book, it would help children maybe see themselves doing repetitive behavior, because that's another thing that for my OCD, I did a lot of repetitive stuff. It could be mowing the grass over and over in the same place. It could be walking up the steps over and over again. And I did it where people couldn't see me because I was so humiliated that I couldn't stop doing it. That's how I felt. And I thought by writing this book, it would be some signs that children might recognize on themselves, and it'd be a topic to talk to their parents about. In fact, I wish this book, or a book like it, if not mine, was in a lot of schools where teachers could be made aware of it and make sure that children aren't being humiliated, you know, by the repetitive or compulsive or however the OCD is representing itself in that child. And I thought maybe the book would help children be able to tell their parents, you know, I do that, you know, and then hopefully a lot of compassion from the parents. We have to have parents be educated also. So my husband and I decided to write this book in rhyme, and it's written with heart. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can tell it's written with heart, and kids do like it. So I've had the book for a long time because you wrote it a long time ago, but I actually used it for the first time with kids a few months back when I had a client who I'm going to call Rohan, who had symptoms that like just obsessions, and then had some compulsive rituals that he was doing. Actually, he had a fear that somebody was going to break into his house and then like kidnap him. And he had been tormented for many, many years, unable to sleep in his own room. And I was working with him, building resilience habits that he could apply to just life in general, and the fact that his brain was sticky, right? And I know some of the parents who are listening to this podcast, your children might not have obsessive compulsive disorder, but maybe their brain is a little sticky and repetitive. So we started off just working on resilience habits, including knowing that we're not alone, which I know is part of your story, Gwen, this idea that we're not alone and then also learning how to observe the habits of his mind without thinking he wasn't. So I actually use a beaver when I teach kids about an obsessive mind, right? So I actually, you know, if anyone is watching the video of this podcast, I have a little beaver here that is my feelings habit animal for having an obsessive mind. So I actually was teaching him how to watch his beaver run around. We have like a plate that we use, but like run around, and like he's not the beaver. It's going on in his mind. So we were building these skills. Actually, I worked with him for over half a year before I realized the nighttime stuff was really, it shared a lot in common with obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm not a therapist, I'm an educator, so I can't diagnose, but I'm like, there's a lot in common. So I had him and his mom read your book, The OCD Beaver. And it was, first off, they were both like stuck to the book. You know, they were fascinated. And there was some pages in there that talked about beaver habits. I'm like, do you want me to skip this? They're like, no. So we read the whole book, and then immediately Rohan was like, that's me. Like I have this. And he started to be able to, so then when we practiced the mindfulness aspect of it, to be able to label it. And he knew in his own mind that the obsession he'd get at night that he was going to be kidnapped was different than a regular thought. He would talk about how it was like a vortex that would like pull him in, and it felt different than just a thought. And he started to learn how to label it. And he started to label it, it's OCD. So I'll talk more later on in this podcast about how I actually wrote a few blog articles on this about how Rohan progressed. But it started off with like his journey to like overcoming his compulsive rituals around his obsession started with actually reading your book and labeling it as OCD.
That's wonderful. That's really, it makes me feel good. I'm glad for that child, because it's very difficult. And over my years of teaching, I frequently saw kids that I thought, oh, maybe there's something going on here. And in one case, I was subbing actually, and I noticed something going on, and I talked to the parents, to the teacher, and I said, maybe the parents need to be aware. And then the teacher wrote me a note back, because I subbed for her another day. And she said that the child actually, was diagnosed as having OCD. And good call, good accidental call. It was just something out of the ordinary. And I did a lot of things out of the ordinary. And did you have another question, Jamie?
Yeah, so so that you were just sharing that there was a child you were subbing, you observed, what was it that cued you in?
I've seen a lot of children over my years, getting nuts over pencil sharpeners, and it was just fun, just fun. He wasn't having fun, and he was sharpening the pencil, and then he went back up immediately almost. He sharpened the pencil. Then he was doing a number of behaviors that appeared to me, because I've been there, repetitive and compulsive. But again, I'm not a psychiatrist or an expert. I'm just saying I was looking at me and I looked at the little boy and I saw me. And so I wrote a note and the boy got help and he indeed has OCD. Shows up in different things. I kept it a secret until I was 44 years old. And I was sitting in a dentist's office and picked up a magazine. And I read an article and I said, that's me. That is me. And there's a name for it. And there's help for it. And I cried in the dentist's office. I asked the dentist if I could keep his magazine and he said yes. And I went home and I told my husband and I found help. I found somebody that specialized with people with my issues. And I don't know if that's the right word, but people like me that had the same problem. And I understood it much, much better. And I continued, I went to different people and talked to them and worked on it. And I'm much better than I was. I'm no longer avoiding things. That's another thing. I did a lot of avoidance. In my case, it was something that actually had a medical basis. But I went way over the top. And if I even saw it, it was honey. It was just honey. I read that some babies had died that were given honey when they were tiny in a nursery, and 10 babies died. And that stuck in my head and I couldn't get rid of it. So I avoided honey. I don't want anybody with me even having honey normally. And then one of my other daughters told me that she's a physician and she said, here's what actually happens. And you can have honey. This is not going to do anything terrible to you. She said most honey that I would be coming in contact with was processed honey, and it isn't going to have a problem. You can eat it. And then one day I saw a candy pumpkin at Halloween, and I thought, I'm going to go for it. And I'm not going to wash my hands after, which I would have done because I was a hand washer. And I ate it. I felt like, I'd hit a home run in a major series or something.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I'm going to call you mom, but that's
Okay.
beautiful, mom, because I know your history. But Gwen, for our listeners here, I know your history with this. Growing up, as a child in your home, I know how much you were tormented by, and for those who are listening who don't know, like honey can have a botulism in it, which is why, especially raw honey, that's the type of honey that can. And so they recommend not giving honey to children under age 1, just because they're more
I
vulnerable.
think it's 2, under 2.
Under 2. Okay. Thanks. And so again, oftentimes with OCD, people get there's like fears of contamination can come up. So like cleaning, that's a common thing for parents who are looking for like, what should I watch for? And in Gwen's case, it was that honey could kill a child, which again, if you didn't have like an OC spectrum disorder, you'd think, okay, don't give honey to the baby. But again, that obsessive compulsive mind can think, oh my gosh, there's honey there. What if it touches my hands? What if this happens? What if it gets a baby? What if the baby dies? Again, these things are not logical, but the obsession is not logical. And I think what's really important, a few things to highlight here. One is education helped you, right? So educating you on what are the actual risks of honey and what are not. And actually, in the case of me working with Rohan, that boy that I worked with in my private practice, we did some education about kidnappers too, and actually about robbers, because he had this idea that a robber was going to come at night. And we talked about the fact that robbers don't usually want to come when people are in the house, and this was actually a piece of what helped him, right? I said, and again, there have been lots of pieces, but and that information alone wouldn't have been enough. But we talked about fact and fiction, and then we talked about the fact that it was an obsession, and eventually he learned to talk back to it, to say, this is an OCD thought. OCD is not always right. And a couple months ago, he started sleeping in his own room. His life really transformed in many, many ways when he was able to unlock from the thought that I should, that this is going to happen. And he actually would tell himself if he kept thinking it was going to happen. Right. And so then that made him resist the thought. And so part of my work with him also was to help him realize the thought's not going to go away. The thought's still going to appear, But when it comes, you can label it and you don't have to believe that this is your own mind manufacturing. So can I ask you, in your own experience, when this do you still sometimes have that thought about honey? And then are you able to say, oh, that's an obsession? That's not, like, I'm curious what your experience is with
I
that
do,
intrusive
I
thought.
do okay, when I look at things, I still look at the labels to see if there's honey in it. And then I decide to myself that I'm not going to be afraid of this, and I pick up the package. I don't try to do anything different, wash my hands, put on a glove, whatever it is I might choose to do. Don't do that. I just stick it in the cart once, and I felt like this was a major change in my life. It made my life better, easier, less stressful. And I'm sure my husband would say it's less stressful. Would you say that?
Yes.
Yep, he says he'd say that. But
That's
he
really
was quite
great.
understanding.
And sometimes too, for kids, it can be little things. So again, nobody in my immediate family, my children, like, we don't have obsessive compulsive disorder, but we definitely we definitely have minds that are a bit obsessive, and we can sometimes have the urge to do compulsions. Like, and I know, an example would be, there was an individual in our home that had the urge to have, like, the drawers certain ways. And if the drawer was not a certain way, and she knew enough about OCD to know that we talk about this with anxiety, with anything, that if you let the obsessive compulsive, like, if you act out on it, you're reinforcing it. And that part of the mind that, like, wants you to do that action is going to get stronger. And so she would actually tell herself, no, 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 I'm going to go to bed right now and I see that the drawer is wrong. Right. And she would make herself go to bed with the drawer wrong because she wanted to not have that get stronger in her. And so, again, if kids have a mind that is sticky or obsessive, again, as caregivers, if we can one, normalize it. And I know that's part of what happened to Rohan when he read your book, because he's like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. I know that's part of what happened to you when you read that article. Oh my gosh, there's other people like me, right? So, like, normalize it. Don't tell the kid, oh, don't worry about it. Oh, it's fine. That is not helpful, because their brain is glitching. That all that does is make them feel like maybe they should hide it, or maybe something is wrong with them. And so we actually want to normalize it. Oh, your brain is sticky. You're not the only one. If it seems like it might be on the obsessive compulsive spectrum, you know what? Some people have something called, OCD, like, and maybe introduce them to my mom's book. And so, the OCD beaver, because again, the more they can realize it, again, even if they don't get a clinical diagnosis, again, if they need a clinical diagnosis, by all means, please get them one. So they need to get the resources. But otherwise, what resources can you bring to them? And part of the resource is actually learning to name it, to flag that it's happening in their mind, and to know they're not alone, and then to help themselves with either knowledge or, I'll share more about other ways that we can help kids to refocus. But yeah, absolutely. The first step is awareness of what's happening.
Another question?
Yes. Well, how would I have a question for you, might be, what would you say are some helpful strategies that you use when your brain starts to get a little glitchy? Or, again, whatever words you like to use it, when your brain starts to get a little obsessive. What are some things that you say to yourself, or things that you do that you find helpful for returning yourself to balance?
I go back in my mind and I say to myself, like, oh, I'm going to just use honey as the example. I can't, I'm not afraid of this. This is not scary. This is something I can handle. And if I wanted to take the item, I go take it. And then I think, I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to wash my hands. This is not necessary. But I do have to remind myself, and I do think about this from time to time, but not like I did, where it was consuming large parts of my day. I would have to do my rituals. I want to do things a certain way. Yes, I want things in a certain spot here. And now my cupboard is such a mess because I'm over that part. I can't find anything anymore. I probably went the opposite direction. And I think it really helps to have supportive people and to inform, and friends that are supportive. Because I now, if I say to somebody, I'm OCD, I frequently hear back, I am too. And I'm surprised because I wouldn't have guessed. And then we talk.
And something I'm hearing, Gwen, is two things. One is that feeling not alone, feeling supportive is important. So again, remembering that as caregivers, part of what we can do is simply be like, I am here to support you, right? And the second thing I've heard is that you had a strong, sometimes I have like different resilience habits. And one of the resilience habits is snuggles or super snuggles. And super snuggles is like, I can do hard things. I've got this. I can handle this. And so I hear you, what you repeat in your own mind is that I'm having this fear. Again, you flag it. I'm having this fear. I don't need to act on it. And I can handle this. Right. So helping kids, again, we want to help kids. We want to give kids compassion for how hard it is to have their mind that's telling them these things. Right. Again, we don't want to tell kids, don't worry about it. That's invalidating. But helping them identify, oh, your brain's doing that again. It's telling you that thing. You know what? You can handle this. You've got this. And then helping kids to develop that voice inside themselves. I know that's part of what ended up happening with Rohan. Also, he ended up being able to tell himself, this is just OCD. I don't have to believe this thought, right? So being able to, again, flag that it's happening and then tell yourself that you can do it. And something else that can be really hard, especially when people haven't unlocked it yet, right? And I can even go back to my own experience. So disclosure here, in my early 20s, I was actually diagnosed with obsessive compulsive personality disorder, okay? Which I don't even know if so on the obsessive compulsive spectrum, right? I was just a little bit over controlling of myself. Let's put it that way. So I don't know about that diagnosis. I don't know that it applies anymore, but I know, and I had some glitchy stuff going on in my brain. I had actually a lot of glitchy stuff going on in my brain. And I uncovered a book called Brain Lock by Jeffrey Schwartz. And oftentimes for kids and grownups, people suggest cognitive behavioral therapy. And the form of it that Jeffrey Schwartz has, he has 4 steps. So the 4 steps for OCD, and by the way, that book, Brain Lock, I got an audiobook. I listened to it on repeat. It's so obnoxious and so effective. Okay, so I highly recommend his 4 steps. And it's kind of, again, I'm not a therapist, I'm an educator, but I help kids to, be aware of these different aspects when their brain's getting sticky. So the first one is to, they're like R's, right? But it's to label that they're having a sticky thought, right? And then to actually kind of relabel it that it's OCD. So recognize, the first one is to recognize that they're having the thought. The second one is to relabel it and reattribute it. Like, this is an OCD thought, right? And so I try to do that, because you have the thought and you think you have to act on it, right? And so to relabel it, like, nope, this is an OCD thought, and to revalue it. OCD thoughts don't need to be given consideration, because oftentimes somebody that has OCD, every time they have the obsession, they'll start to think, is this true? What if it's true? What if I really need, and again, nope, it's an OCD thought. And then the last one for him is to refocus and to do something different, because it can be so hard to sit with an obsession in a compulsive urge, and even to put a gap between the urge and the behavior. And I know for myself, back in my early 20s, I would sometimes use a little timer and be like, okay, I want to take 2 minutes before I do this action, to try to start to separate out the compulsion from the action. And during that 2 minutes, Jeffrey Schwartz's suggestion is to do something different, to refocus your mind, to even play a little, again, you don't want to develop a habit of handheld games, right? But find something, read a little book, do something funny that will shift your awareness away to, again, break the neural synapses of obsessive compulsive action, right? So you can have a little bit of gap in between. And so I think it's also important to help kids realize that the OCD thought, they don't want to make it go away. If you try to make it go away, you're going to loop. You're going to loop and you're going to loop. And instead, what's more helpful is to label it, reattribute it, and then refocus on something different while you wait for it to dissipate on its own. So
That's very.
do you ever have you ever found different kind of actions you can take if you have, and again, maybe this isn't true for you, because it sounds like for you, something, and this is kind of, I think what happened for Rohan too, is something just clicked in his brain, and then it wasn't as sticky anymore. It was easier to talk back to, but I'm just curious if in that space in between, if you had, I know sometimes this is also exposure and response prevention, which I know you tried that therapy and found it problematic. It's not for everybody. I'm just curious if you have like things that you have refocused on in the past when your brain gets a little loopy that you found helpful.
I actually do. One of the things is back to honey again, because believe it or not, that has been a real problem for me. It doesn't even make sense to probably a lot of people, but for me, it was a big problem. I did refocus. In fact, I've gotten good at it. Used to avoid the aisle in the store that had the honey. So I would look on the floor if I had to go down that aisle for something. Is there any, did somebody spill some? Did something happen? You know, I mean, these are all the things that are, and now what I do is I walk down the aisle. I look at the peanut butter located right next to it. And we get what we need to get and we go, and I don't look at the floor. It took me a long time, but now I really truly don't think about it. I don't think about that floor. And I feel a sense of peace because I know there's raw honey up there. And that's the one I don't like, but it helps a lot, you know, if I can get my mind off of it, and then eventually it becomes a habit again, a normal habit, like a normal person would do. Because like I said, I didn't have this problem until I was 8 years old.
Yeah, so that's again the idea is because if you went down that aisle and thought, don't look at the honey, that would be unhelpful because again, what we resist persists. But instead, you say to yourself, look at the peanut butter, right? And so again, I think this is a helpful habit to teach kids, and then to normalize that. Yep, in the back of your mind, you might still be thinking about the honey, but it's not the only thing you're thinking about, right? You can also think about honey. And again, it's
Yes.
again, it's so true. I mean, you can also think about peanut butter, right? Like you can also like it doesn't have to be all of your awareness. So that idea of like that thought's there, but it doesn't have to be the only thought can sometimes be powerful for kids.
Well, initially I went really crazy when I decided I could have honey, you know, and I was looking for products to have that I hadn't had that I was hungry for. Oh, a candy corn, you know, you name it. It was all treats, of course, but I no longer was afraid. I mean, I could touch a jar, and I never thought the day would come when I could touch it.
Yeah, I didn't either. I didn't either, Mom. I never thought that day would come either. So I'm so joyful for you because I know what a mental, it's mentally traumatic. It's mentally
It
traumatic.
is. And then,
Mhm.
and I think part that's as bad as it being traumatic is the fact that I felt, and I'm sure a lot of other people with OCD would agree, that they kept it a secret. It's a secret. You just don't want anybody to really know it. And once I said to, like, every now and then I'll say to somebody, you know, we'd be talking about something, and I say, I have OCD. So many people say, so do I, or my brother does, or my sister does. So it doesn't feel like a stigma anymore. I used to worry. Now, like for something like this, where I'm saying this in public and anybody can see this, I think it helps a lot of other people to realize that there's hope. It's not always going to feel like this. You know, you got to get educated. You got to go see people. You know, there's a lot of things to do, but it can get a lot better. Is it perfect? No. You know, it's not perfect because, you know, I still think about some things with it, but it's not up in my mind every day of the week, every hour of the day anymore. So that's progress.
That is, and I think that's important again for caregivers to think about is the idea of progress with kids. And the last thing that I'd like to touch on, and then we'll kind of be bringing this to a close, is I just want to touch on the idea of medication. And again, this is not, this podcast is educational. It's not therapeutic. I'm not a therapist, you know, so all these disclaimers. But I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that for some people, medications can help to diminish the symptoms enough that they can actually, you know, like even use the 4 steps. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like recognize, relabel, reattribute, refocus. That can be really hard to do for some people. Like sometimes the obsession is so big in their brain that they can't even begin to consider approaching whatever they're fearing. And that for some people, the adding of medication can enable them to do the 4 steps, and then maybe they can gradually decrease the medication, or maybe they're on medication. But I just want to mention that that can sometimes be part of the treatment. Did you have any thoughts to share around that?
Yeah, actually, when I was a student at Oshkosh, I had a compulsion, to go touch a building. God knows why, because I sure don't. To go touch a building across campus. It was not real light outside. It was dangerous. There was nobody around. So, I was putting myself out there, but the compulsion was greater than the fear of the danger. And I went and I had to touch that building. And then finally, I think at that moment in time, I thought, I'm not going to do this again. I'm putting myself out there. And I went to see somebody that knew about OCD, and this particular person had a medication, and I took that medication, and I don't know what it was. And then eventually he left campus. I didn't know how to track him down, but it was a little blue pill, and it took the edge off it. For some reason, it took the edge off. I'd never had the edge off. I just felt like, boy, life feels like worth living. And I was doing well. I wasn't loopy or anything. And then when I went to get one, they said, well, that person isn't on campus anymore, da, 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 da. And I couldn't find out. And then obviously there was some regression, because the pill was helping me somehow relax my mind. And but I do believe medication can have a place in helping, but that I think it's really good if you can just get yourself help. I think that's a much better way. I'm glad for all the help I've gotten. I'm so glad my daughter's interested in this also. I really, tip my so-called hat to you, Jamie. You do a wonderful job. Thank you.
Aw, thank you, Mama. So where can people go to find out more about to buy your book? And I just a little plug here for a future podcast, maybe next season of my podcast, I'd love to have Gwen Tatera back again, because she also wrote a book called Piggy Pie's Pickle Problem, which is about addiction. Because again, the more we can talk about these things with kids, and the idea is not that we talk about them with kids so that kids label themselves early or anything like that. No. But to just flag what the tendencies are, to make it aware, and to help them feel like they have, one, the ability to talk about it, that they're not alone, and then two, the ability to be aware, like, is my brain going down this way, right? So the book for this podcast is that OCD Beaver book, and which is a great one for parents to just have in their collection,
Hold it up higher.
educators to have in their collection. Yes. Oh, yeah. Again, for anyone watching the video, here's a picture of it. But actually, I'll have it be the picture for the podcast episode. I'll have the book be the picture. But where can they go to buy this? Because again, if so often I feel sorrow that often for as parents, and again, it's never too late. It's never too late to do an intervention, but it's also never too early. And so the more, even before your kids present with problems, if you just have this book where it's on your bookshelf, if teachers just read this in classrooms, if the kids start to have something, they'll say like, oh, Mama, remember that book we read? I think my brain's doing something like that, right? Whereas otherwise they might think, oh my God, something's wrong with me. So where can people go to find your book?
Well, if they live in Green Bay, which most people probably do not that are getting this, Ceruggi's Chocolates in De Pere, Wisconsin, SEROOGY''S, carries both of my books, OCD Beaver and Piggy Pie's Pickle Problem.
Well, or otherwise people can always email me at jamielynntatera.com. My email address is actually JLT, Jamie Lynn Tatera, JLT at jamielynntatera.com. You could always email me and I could connect you with Gwen Tatera so that she could have you. But I think the easiest way for most people might be to just truthfully go on Amazon. And then I think you have to click like other buying options, and then you can put it in there. That's probably the simplest way for people to order your
And
book.
if that doesn't work, then Jamie Lynn will give you information.
Exactly. Wonderful.
Well,
So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experience and sharing this resource that parents and teachers and other caregivers of children can share with kids, so that again we can help kids to feel resourced and help them to build empathy for other kids who might have the problem, and also realize they're not alone.
Okay, thank you.
The world keeps turning, things change. We have new obstacles that are thrown in our way. You can't hold us down. Together we'll get around. You just have to look inside, and you will find get you through. You just have to look inside and you will find that we are in it together. I know it in my heart. You are not alone. You are not, and we are in it together. I've known it from the start. You are not alone. You are not alone. We've got Bunny. You're not alone. Doodles. What can you do? Spots. We can be aware. And Snuggles. I care about you. When life gets hard.